Well, good evening. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Portland's Informational Ballot Measure Program. My name is Debbie Kay, and I have the honor of being the Portland League's president. The League is dedicated to making democracy work. We believe that democracy works best when we are informed about issues and engaged in our communities. The League presents these programs to give our Multnomah County community members an opportunity to learn about issues that affect our lives and our well-being. So thank you again for participating. I want to acknowledge that we are on the occupied sacred lands and waters of the indigenous Chinookan people and other native peoples as well, and that we aspire to be as good and effective stewards of the land and waters as they. Tonight, we have 6 leading agency officials from Metro, the City of Portland, and Portland Public Schools, and they will discuss their respective ballot measures. Let me remind you that our election is on November 5th. Ballots must be received by 8 o'clock that night, and if you're going to mail it, get it mailed about a week in advance or use a drop-off site in that intervening week. We thank the Multnomah Bar Foundation and the Carol and Velma Sailing Foundation for funding the League's voter service work. And we thank Multnomah County for letting us use their boardroom. This program is also sponsored by our League's Education Fund. Metro East Community Media, our wonderful media partner, will broadcast tonight's ballot measure discussion on its cable channels. The rebroadcast schedule is on the table by the door. YouTube video recordings of each measure discussion in tonight's program will be available soon and posted on the League's website at lwvpdx.org and at our outstanding voter resource center, vote411.org. I am pleased to report that the League of Women Voters of Portland recently released our city government study update titled The City That Works, Preparing Portland for the Future. You can find it on our website, and we hope you will join us right here on November 12th at 7 o'clock to hear about our study results. The back page of your program has information on this important and timely program. The League of Women Voters is a membership organization. If you like this program and the many other programs and services that we offer, then please consider joining us. It is an exciting time. There's a lot to do. We would value your participation and your support. We thank our speakers, our moderator, and League volunteers for their time and expertise in bringing these programs to you. And when you vote, if you have registered your ballot with the county, you get one of these by email. I voted. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, a longtime League member and past president of the League of Women Voters of Portland, my esteemed colleague, Carol Cushman.
Okay, we now turn to the City of Portland's ballot measure 26204. Our speakers this evening are from the Portland Water Bureau, Mike Stohr, who is the Director, Administrator of the Bureau, and Gabriel Salmer, who is the Deputy Director. Ballot Measure 26204 amends the charter to increase protections for the Bull Run Watershed. The question: shall the charter be amended to increase Bull Run Watershed protections by restricting access, regulating allowed activities, and limiting land uses? Mike and Gabe, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Carol. Again, my name is Gabrielle Salmer. I'm the Deputy Director at the Water Bureau. Thank you so much to the League of Women Voters for having us tonight. At the Portland Water Bureau, we serve water to nearly 1 million people. It's close to a quarter of the state's population. We've operated our water system since 1895. It's a bit before my time, but just a bit. And we have, just for your facts, we've got 2,250 miles of pipe. So it's a fairly big system, the biggest in the state. Just a couple of ground rules for this evening as city employees. In terms of ballot measures, Mike and I can just talk about the facts. So that means that we can't advocate on behalf of ballot measures, even if they, and especially if they impact us directly. We've been advised by our city attorney about how we can appropriately share this information and abide by this. And we are allowed to advocate for measures on our own time, but since we are here in our official capacities, we will stick just to the facts. Thank you. So as Carol mentioned, we're here first to talk about ballot measure 26204, which increases protections for the Bull Run watershed. And just a little bit about what would happen if these amendments were to be passed. They would add environmental and land use limitations for the Bull Run watershed. That is Portland's primary drinking water source. They would add those to the city charter. The proposed limitations currently exist in city code, but they could be amended or removed by a vote of the city council. And the current charter does not reference the Bull Run watershed. And because the city charter can only be amended by Portland voters in an election, the proposed amendment would provide long-term conservation of the watershed unless Portland voters decided to change those limitations in the future. The provisions that would be added to the city charter would, very similar to what is in the code, the city code right now, prohibit the public from entering the watershed. There are specified exemptions. If you've taken a tour of our watershed, you know that the public can be invited in under those conditions. It would prohibit tree cutting for any purpose not related to the city's drinking water or hydroelectric systems, and prohibit transferring city-owned lands or infrastructure to private businesses or organizations. Again, those are in our city code, but they would be put into the city charter. And if the amendment is not passed, you might wonder what would happen. Those environmental and land use limitations for the Bull Run watershed would continue to exist in the city code. They would be subject to amendment by the city council, but they would not be changed by the passage or not passage of this ballot measure. Just a little bit about the Bull Run watershed. As I mentioned, it's been our primary water source since 1895. Our water does not actually come from Mount Hood, but the watershed land is in the Mount Hood National Forest. We own about 5%, the city owns about 5% of the watershed, 95% by the Forest Service, and we co-manage that under the Bull Run Act. It's 147 square miles of watershed management area, and it is closed to the public, except again under certain circumstances, people who are operating the water system, or of course people who have been invited on a tour. And if you would like more information about that, you can find it on our website. There's no recreational use of the watershed, no pesticides or fertilizers are used, and we do have mitigation projects for fish and wildlife. That's a little bit about it. I will show you just a quick map if you're not familiar with the watershed. This is the watershed management unit. You can see it is just south of the Columbia River. And then just to give you a little orientation, on the right side of the screen you can see Bull Run Lake, and on the left side you can see our two reservoirs, creatively named Reservoir 1 and 2. And our next map just gives you a sense of where we are in relation to Portland. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the management unit with the reservoirs. Above that is the river, and then all the way to the left, 26 miles by gravity, our water flows into Portland. So I will leave it there and turn it over for any questions on this ballot measure.
Sorry. Okay, the protected area is so large. Why not open the Bull Run area to limited public use?
I've just been passed the buck. In the near term, we're restricted by our compliance agreement with the Oregon Health Authority and Environmental Protection Agency that we have very, very strong protections in the watershed because we don't have a filtration plant. In the long term, the Bureau would still think that source water protection is extremely important, and we would hope that we keep those protections in the long term. That's why we're saying no tree cutting, no anything else. I think that one of the challenges that you see in the East Coast is almost all of their water supplies are surrounded by lakes and hotels and recreation areas, and this one is not. It's about as clean a water as you can provide anywhere, and we would intend to keep that.
Okay, hopefully you can answer this one and it's not an opinion one. Why not wait to add this to the charter as part of the charter review process, which is coming up in 2021?
I'm told we need to defer that question.
Okay, I was expecting that, but I thought I would try and see
Yeah,
if
thank
it
you. Good
would
effort.
run. Does climate change affect what we should be doing as far as the protections that will run?
The Bureau studies climate change. I think we have one of the best climate change programs in the region. And I think all of our protections are designed to make sure that we can respond to climate change. One of the challenges here with hotter and drier summers, and maybe a reason we would continue to keep the watershed closed, is hotter, drier summers means you have more fuel and more chance of fire. And so we watch that. If you're me, I look at how full the reservoirs are in May and how quickly they fill in November. I call those the shoulders of the water system. And the distance between the shoulders is getting a bit wider, and our watershed may become drier. So we're continuing to try and protect our watershed and make sure that we don't have fires there insofar as we possibly can.
This is sort of related and brought up by your answer. We had a fire very close to the watershed. Would you like to comment on it and what effect it had?
The Eagle Creek fire was started outside of the watershed. It did burn into the watershed management unit, so you can see that the green outline. It did not actually burn into the watershed, into where, a watershed, for those of you who don't know, is where a drop of water that falls there is contained in that area.
The blue dots that you see on that map are the hydrologic watershed. So water inside the blue dots flows down into the reservoirs.
So we were very lucky with the Eagle Creek fire that we didn't see more damage to the protected Bull Run watershed, but we were very active in addressing that fire and working with all of the authorities to make sure that we were protected. But the watershed itself is one of the wetter areas in the region. It receives a lot more water than we receive here in Portland, and so it is actually fairly difficult for a fire to start in the watershed where you have all that moisture, but we do look out to protect from fires that would start outside and burn into the watershed.
Okay, can you tell us more about the mitigation projects that you referenced?
Oh, the Habitat Conservation Plan. Something I think the Bureau very wisely did, actually, I might be old, but happened before I started at the Water Bureau, is something called the Habitat Conservation Plan. And one of the challenges when you have, we're sort of married to the Forest Service for this real estate. We have 2 dams in the watershed that are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So there is a federal nexus to our projects. And one of the benefits of a habitat conservation plan, besides taking care of the watershed and mitigating for our activities in there, is that it gives us regulatory certainty It's much simpler for us to deal over the long term with activities in the watershed when we have an agreement with the federal agencies already on environmental aspects. So I think it's a really important agreement. We honor that agreement, and we've spent millions of dollars complying with it.
Another question asking why now? Have there been any recent proposals to change the city code to allow uses currently prohibited?
No.
With 95% in federal control, what effect can this protection have on the 5%?
The watershed is co-managed by the Forest Service and the City of Portland. So we have always worked very collaboratively with the Forest Service, going back through the protections of the watershed. We do this work together. So but the charter amendment is specific to enshrining the protections that are in our city code into the city charter. So they wouldn't have an effect beyond that.
Okay. Does this new filtration plant that is coming soon change the protection that's required?
We would continue the same protections, I think, and you can say something if you like.
We are building a filtration plant approved by the City Council, and the schedule for that filtration plant is under a bilateral compliance agreement that sets the schedule to be done in 2027. There are also requirements in that compliance agreement for very strict protections of water quality because we are an unfiltered system. When the filtration plant is built and is operating, we will be a filtered system, and we will be operating under the protections either in city code if this is not passed, or in city charter if it is.
Thank you. That we have exhausted the questions that our audience shared with us. Thank you both for your presentation on this measure, and we will move on to the next Water Bureau measure in just a few moments. So let's thank them for this presentation as we give our Metro East their 15 seconds.